The dog made the decision before anyone in the room had time to breathe. That was what Willa Strand would remember most in the weeks after. Not the sergeant's voice. Not the way his jaw had tightened when she stepped forward. Not even the low, warning growl that had silenced the entire waiting room. What she would remember was the exact moment Havoc stopped growling, the precise second the sound cut from the air like a cord snapping, and the Belgian Malinois turned his massive head away from the man holding his leash and looked straight at her. Just looked, like he'd been waiting. The Claremont Military Working Dog Rehabilitation Center sat on the edge of Fayetteville, North Carolina, in a low beige building that smelled like antiseptic and wet fur, and the particular brand of organized chaos that only exists in places that care for animals in distress. It was not glamorous work. Willa Strand had been a veterinary technician there for 4 years, and she had never once pretended it was. She'd been bitten twice, scratched more times than she could count, and had cried in the supply closet on at least 6 separate occasions. She'd also stayed 2 hours past the end of her shift more times than she could remember, because sometimes a dog woke up alone from sedation and needed a hand to press their nose against until their breathing steadied. She was 31 years old. She had a ponytail that never stayed neat past noon, a broken-in pair of New Balance sneakers she refused to replace, and the kind of quiet she had learned to carry after her brother Kevin was killed overseas 7 years ago. Not sadness, exactly. More like a weight she'd long since figured out how to move around with. She was checking vaccine records at the front desk when the door opened. She heard him before she saw him. Heavy boots, the kind of walk that announces itself, not loud, but deliberate, like every step was a statement. She looked up, and the first thing she registered was the dog. The Belgian Malinois was enormous for the breed, lean and dark, with a black mask and amber eyes that moved constantly, scanning the room with the focused efficiency of an animal trained to assess threat. He walked on Sergeant First Class Boyd Callister's left side, close enough that their bodies nearly touched, his ears forward, muscles coiled. His gait was wrong on the back right. A slight hitch, barely there but unmistakable to someone who spent her days watching the way animals moved. He was compensating. Boyd Callister was 38 or so, broad across the shoulders in the way that came from actual use rather than a gym, with close-cropped hair and a face that had spent time outdoors. He wore a civilian jacket over a gray army shirt, but military was all over him. The posture, the scan of the room, the way he stopped just inside the door and let his eyes complete a full circuit before he moved again. He had a purple heart pin on his jacket lapel and the kind of stillness that coexisted uneasily with intensity. He also had the expression of a man who had already decided this was going to be a waste of his time. "I have an appointment," he said, Callister, 10 o'clock. Delia, the receptionist, smiled at him. "Absolutely, we have you right here. Havoc, right? We'll get you both. Just tell me where to go." He wasn't rude, exactly. It was worse than rude, actually. It was dismissive, like the pleasantry wasn't worth engaging with. Delia's smile held barely. "Room 3 is ready. Someone will be right in." Willa watched him move down the hallway without waiting. The dog walked at his heel with the kind of precision that only came from years of work together, the two of them so coordinated they moved like a single unit. Even with the injured leg, Havoc kept pace. He didn't want to show it. She recognized that. Animals in pain spent enormous energy pretending they weren't. She had been assigned to Havoc's initial intake. She gathered her kit and knocked once on the door of room 3 before pushing it open. Boyd Callister was standing in the middle of the room, not sitting, standing, with his arms crossed and his weight back. He had not put Havoc up on the exam table. Havoc stood beside him, that amber gaze moving to Willa the moment she entered. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Willa, I'll be." "How long has Dr. Pham been doing this?" She paused. "Dr. Pham has been treating military working dogs for over 12 years. She's one of the—" "I'm asking because whoever I talked to on the phone said she'd be doing the exam herself." "Dr. Pham will absolutely be in. I do the initial intake, vitals, movement assessment, preliminary." "Fine." He said the word like a door closing. She set her kit down on the counter and turned to look at Havoc properly. "Can you tell me what you've been noticing?" The intake form mentioned right hind quarter. He took shrapnel. 14 months ago. They cleared him for active, said the wound healed. It didn't. Boyd's voice was flat. He's been compensating on that right side for the past 3 months, and nobody at the base facility will listen to me. I hear you. She meant it. She'd seen that story before. Working dogs pushed back to duty before they were ready. Handlers watching something get worse and feeling like they were talking to a wall. May I approach him? Boyd looked at her for the first time, as if she were actually a person in the room, and not just an obstacle between him and Dr. Pham. He's not a pet, he said. He's not going to let you just walk up and put your hands on him. He doesn't do that with people he doesn't know. I'd ask that you wait until Dr. Pham. I understand. May I approach him? The expression that crossed Boyd Callister's face was one she would have missed if she hadn't been looking. It was fast. A flash of something close to amusement, the kind that didn't have warmth in it. He thought she was naive. He thought she was about to embarrass herself. He'll bite, Boyd said. Not as a warning, exactly. More like a statement of fact he was committing to in advance, so there would be no misunderstanding about whose fault it was. Okay, Willa said. She wasn't being dismissive. She simply filed it under information received and held her ground. She took one step toward Havoc and stopped. She didn't crouch. That could read as a lunge posture to a dog on alert. She didn't extend her hand. She just stood, with her weight balanced, shoulders relaxed, eyes slightly averted. She breathed out, slow, counted it. Havoc's ears shifted. 1 degree, maybe 2, a tiny rotation, almost imperceptible. His gaze moved from Boyd to her face, then dropped to her hands, then came back to her face. Willa stayed still. Boyd uncrossed his arms. She didn't look at him. She kept her attention soft, unfocused, somewhere around Havoc's shoulder. Another breath. She had learned this, the patience required for animals that had every reason to distrust a stranger's approach, from a woman named Dr. Pham, yes, but also from sitting beside her brother Kevin when he came back from his first deployment and couldn't sleep. You didn't push, you just stayed present. You let them decide when you were safe. Havoc took a step toward her. Boyd made a sound, not a word, almost a word, something that started in his throat and didn't make it out. He reached for the leash. Havoc took another step. And then the dog was pressing his nose to the back of Willa's hand, not sniffing cautiously but pressing, with full contact, like he was reading something through her skin. His breath was warm and his nose was cold, and Willa held absolutely still and let him. The room was silent. Havoc made a sound. It was low and complicated, not a whine exactly, something between a whine and a sigh, and then he pressed his head against her leg and left it there. Willa's eyes burned. She didn't let it become anything. She just rested her hand very gently on top of Havoc's head, and the dog did not move. That's... Boyd stopped. She looked at him then. His face had done something she hadn't expected. The careful neutrality he'd been wearing since he walked in the door had cracked somewhere around his eyes. He was staring at Havoc with an expression she recognized in the way you recognize a thing you've seen before but couldn't name. Something between disbelief and a kind of grief. It's okay, she said quietly, to him, not the dog. He didn't answer. He was still staring. Can I ask you something? She said. She kept her voice low, the same register she'd been using since she walked in, because the dog was still leaning against her leg, and she didn't want to change anything in the air. Havoc's file says he was deployed in the Kunar province. What unit was he with? Boyd's head came up sharply. Why? My brother was 75th Ranger Regiment, 3rd Battalion. He was killed in Kunar province 7 years ago. She paused. His name was Kevin Strand. The silence in the room had a different texture now. Boyd Callister looked at her for a long time. His jaw worked. She watched something move through his face that he didn't have the tools to stop. Something that had been held down for a long time breaking the surface before he could decide whether to let it. Kevin Strand, he repeated. Yes. Kevin Strand, who sang Springsteen at the top of his lungs on every patrol. His voice had changed completely. It was rough at the edges now in a way it hadn't been before. Who had a picture of his sister taped inside his helmet. The air went out of Willa's chest. He talked about you, Boyd said. He talked about you a lot. He looked at Havoc. The dog had not moved from her side. Havoc was with the element that day. He was, Havoc knew Kevin. They worked together for 2 weeks during the transition period before he was transferred to our unit. He stopped. His throat moved. Dogs remember scent for years, decades sometimes. You smell like him. Willa's hand was still on Havoc's head. The dog had not moved. She thought about her brother, the way he smelled like diesel, and that cheap sport deodorant he always bought in bulk. And she thought about the way she'd kept one of his shirts unwashed for 6 months after the notification arrived at her door, just to have something to press her face into. She wasn't crying. She was very deliberately not crying, not yet, not here, because she had a job to do and because Havoc needed the calm. But her hand tightened slightly in the fur behind the dog's ears, and Havoc pressed harder against her leg. And for a moment the room held the three of them and the weight of everything that had happened 7 years ago and all the years since. Dr. Nadia Pham found them like that when she came in 5 minutes later. Willa Strand, crouching with her arms around a Belgian Malinois who was supposed to be unapproachable, and Boyd Callister sitting in the chair against the walls, with his elbows on his knees and his head down, his hands pressed together between them, as still as she had ever seen a person be. The X-rays told the story clearly. The base facility had cleared Havoc for duty based on imaging that showed the shrapnel wound as healed. It was healed technically on the surface. What they'd missed, or chose not to look at too closely, Dr. Pham said, her voice careful but the implication plain, was a small fragment that had migrated over 14 months, shifting incrementally toward the sciatic nerve pathway. Another few months and Havoc would have been in significant and irreversible pain, possibly already was. It's surgical, Dr. Pham said. The good news is we're catching it before it reaches the nerve. The procedure is straightforward. The recovery is 4 to 6 weeks, with PT after, and I have every reason to believe he'll have full function. Boyd asked 3 questions, all of them specific and informed, the questions of a man who had read everything available about canine orthopedic injury before this appointment. Dr. Pham answered them directly. Willa watched him take in each answer, process it, file it somewhere internal. He should have been caught sooner, Boyd said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Dr. Pham did not soften it. I told them. I told the facility vet 3 months ago. I put it in writing. I know. I've seen the communication log you sent when you made this appointment. Dr. Pham folded her hands on the desk. I've already been in contact with the oversight board. This will be formally reviewed. Something in Boyd's posture shifted. Not much, just enough. After Dr. Pham left to arrange the surgical schedule, the room went quiet again. Willa was logging Havoc's vitals at the counter. The dog was beside her, still, his breathing slow and even. He'd been calmer since the moment in room 3, in a way that was hard to explain if you hadn't seen it, like something had settled inside him. I owe you an apology, Boyd said from behind her. She turned around. He was looking at Havoc, not at her. When I came in this morning, I'm not easy with new people handling him. I know how that came across. It came across as someone who doesn't trust people to take care of what matters to them, Willa said. That's not an unreasonable position to be in, especially when the system has already failed you once. He looked at her then. That doesn't mean it was comfortable to be on the receiving end, she added, but I understand it. He was quiet for a moment. Your brother. He stopped, started again. He was good. I want you to know that, in case anyone hasn't told you. Not good in a generic sense. Good in a specific sense, the kind of specific that's harder to be. He was patient when patience was the hardest thing to be. He was. Another pause. The muscle in his jaw worked. He saw people all the way. He had a way of making you feel visible. Willa looked at the floor for a moment. She breathed. He used to say, you were the one who taught him that, Boyd said. He said his sister was the one who taught him how to actually be present with a person. She hadn't known that. In 7 years, that was a thing she had not known, and now she did, and it moved through her in a way that she would need time to sit with later, somewhere private. I became a vet tech because of him, she said. After. I needed somewhere to put the part of me that needed to take care of something. She looked at Havoc. Animals don't ask you to explain your grief. They just let you show up. Boyd nodded slowly. He looked like a man who understood that more than he might have chosen to. He's going to be okay, Willa said. Havoc, Dr. Pham is one of the best. He's going to be okay. Boyd looked at the dog for a long moment. His expression was a complicated thing, exhaustion and relief, and something older underneath both of them. I just needed someone to actually look, he said. That's all. I needed someone to look at him the way he deserved. I know, Willa said. I know. Havoc's surgery was scheduled for Thursday. Boyd Callister was there at 6 in the morning, an hour before anyone asked him to be, sitting in the parking lot in a gray pickup truck when Willa pulled in. She didn't comment on it. She just unlocked the side entrance and told him the coffee machine in the staff break room was decent if he wanted to come in out of the cold. He did. They sat in the break room while the building came to life around them. Lights flickering on, the first morning staff filtering in, the soft sounds of animals waking in the recovery ward. Willa had her hands wrapped around her mug. Boyd had his on the table in front of him, not quite touching his cup. Can I ask you something? He said. Go ahead. When you walked into that room yesterday and I told you he'd bite, you didn't even hesitate. I hesitated, she said. You couldn't see it because it was internal. But you still walked forward. Yes. Why? She thought about it honestly. Because he was hurting, and he needed someone to not be scared of him. Boyd was quiet. The coffee maker beeped in the corner. A lot of people, he said slowly, when they look at Havoc, or when they looked at me after, they see the part that's dangerous first. They adjust back from there. You went the other direction. That's the job, she said. You start with the animal in front of you. You figure out what it needs. You don't start with what it might do to you. Kevin said something like that once. Boyd's voice was careful. He said the problem with most people in a conflict situation is they're already 10 steps ahead, calculating the threat. He said the people who were actually good at it, who were actually safe, paradoxically, were the ones who could stay in the present moment. Right here, right now, what's in front of me? He got that from our mother, Willa said. She was a hospice nurse for 30 years. Boyd looked at her. Something in his face opened slightly. So it runs in the family. We were a family that stayed, Willa said. With the hard things, we stayed. Havoc came through surgery at 10:42 in the morning, Doctor. Pham came out to the waiting room and told Boyd herself, walking him through each step in the kind of precise, unhurried detail that made Willa love her. The procedure had gone exactly as planned. The fragment was out. The nerve pathway was clear and undamaged. He would wake up in the next 30 minutes, and they'd monitor him through the afternoon. When Dr. Pham asked if Boyd wanted to be with him when he woke, Boyd said yes before she'd finished the sentence. Willa watched him go back through the double doors with Nadia, his shoulders carrying something they hadn't when he arrived the day before. Not lighter, not exactly, but differently arranged. Less armored. As if the rigid structure he'd been holding himself in had softened just enough to let blood flow back into the places that had gone numb. She thought about Kevin. She thought about the picture inside his helmet. She thought about 14 months of a dog walking wrong, and a man who kept putting it in writing, and nobody listening. Until one morning a woman he'd written off at first glance turned out to be the one thing his dog had been looking for. She thought about the ways the world looped back on itself, the connections that ran underground for years and then surfaced somewhere you never thought to look. The formal review of Havoc's case resulted in an audit of the base veterinary facility's protocols. 3 other dogs were identified with similar documentation gaps, cleared for duty on incomplete imaging. Boyd Callister's written communication log, the one he'd kept meticulously for months, became central to the proceedings. The facility's lead vet was placed on administrative review. Changes to the post-service animal assessment protocol were initiated within the regional command. None of that happened fast. None of it happened because Boyd Callister was easy or accommodating, or because any single person in the system woke up and decided to care. It happened because he refused to stop putting it in writing, and because Dr. Nadia Pham made 4 phone calls to people who listened to her, and because sometimes institutions move when enough individuals refuse to be dismissed. Havoc spent 3 weeks in recovery at Claremont. Boyd drove 40 minutes each way every single day to sit with him for the allotted visiting hours, and on 2 occasions, after Willa mentioned offhandedly that the evenings could be long for dogs in the recovery ward, he drove back in the evening too. She saw him most days. They fell into the easy rhythm of people who have recognized something in each other and don't feel the need to name it right away. Coffee in the break room before her shift started, updates on Havoc's PT progress. Occasional conversations that drifted beyond the dog and into the territory of people who have both carried something heavy for a long time and are learning, slowly, to set it down in the company of someone who understands the weight. He brought her brother up sometimes. Small things, specific things, the Springsteen song, a story about a sandstorm, the way Kevin had once convinced the entire unit to play cards for 7 hours straight during a lockdown situation purely by being relentlessly good-natured about it. Each story was a gift he gave carefully, watching her face to see if it helped or hurt. She told him it helped, and she meant it. The stories gave Kevin back to her in small pieces, in the form of a man who had seen her brother from the outside and loved what he saw. She cried twice, not in front of Boyd, but twice. On the day Dr. Pham cleared Havoc for his first off-leash exercise in the facility's rear yard, Willa happened to be on her break. She stood at the window and watched Boyd unclip the leash, and she watched Havoc do something dogs do when pain has been the context for long enough and then it isn't. He ran. Not the hitch compensating careful movement of the past months. He ran in a wide circle around the yard with his ears flat and his body low, and every line of him describing the particular joy of a body that works. Boyd stood in the center of the yard and watched his dog run, and Willa could see his face from the window. She didn't need to be close to read it. It was the face of someone who had spent a long time in the dark holding on to something and had finally come out. She turned away from the window to give him that moment privately. There are things that belong to a person, private things, interior things, the moments when the self you've been protecting finally exhales. Willa had spent her career learning to step forward when she was needed and to step back when she wasn't. She had learned it from Dr. Pham and from her mother and from Kevin, who had a picture of his sister inside his helmet because she was the one who taught him how to be present with a person. She still had his hoodie. She washed it years ago and the smell was long gone, but she still had it. Some things you keep not because they carry the past, but because they are the connective tissue between who you were and who you've become. On Havoc's last day at Claremont, Boyd stood at the front desk and handed Willa a card. The kind of card that takes a while to find, because it doesn't say the right thing anywhere on the front and you have to write it yourself on the inside. She read it later in her car before she drove home. He'd written, "I came in here ready to protect him from everyone. I didn't know I needed to find someone I could trust to see him the way he deserves. I didn't know he'd be the one to find her first. Kevin would have liked you. I think he knew that. I think that's why he talked about you the way he did." She sat with it for a while. The parking lot emptied around her, the late afternoon shifting into early evening, the sky going the particular shade of pale gold that Fayetteville gets in early October. Then she drove home. Some things don't end. They don't tie up. They shift into something that travels with you differently. No longer weight, exactly, but presence. Kevin had died 7 years ago. The country that asked him to go had not always treated the ones it sent with the care they deserved. A dog had walked for 14 months on a wound no one wanted to take the time to see. But the dog had also walked into a waiting room one Tuesday morning and looked across the room at a woman who smelled like someone he loved, and he had made a choice. And in that choice, in that single unhesitating movement toward her, everything else had started. Willa Strand drove home with the windows down and the radio on, and she did not feel like a woman who had been softened by the world. She felt like a woman who had stayed in it all the way, without flinching, and had found that staying sometimes was the bravest and most necessary thing a person could do.